Hey, so what's going on, ladies and gentlemen? So, in the previous lesson, 6.1, excuse me, 6.2.1, you all learned about the state of workers, and more specifically, you took a look at what working conditions were like. In this lesson, 6.2.2, we're going to look at the response that came from the workers and what they did to improve their working conditions. So, let's go ahead and into it. So they began organizing for change. The workers were not happy about their working conditions and how company management was basically getting over on them. And so the workers kind of came together. They unionized, meaning they came together under one common goal, which was really to improve their working conditions. And that included many different things: the actual physical working conditions that they worked in within the factory, to the wages that they were paid, even including their own workday, how long they worked each day. And so workers began organizing in the late 1860s and 1870s. The first unions that actually existed were in the cigar making industry as well as the shoemaking and coal mining industries. However, the most notable labor unions were those that were within the railroad industry. As we talked about during westward expansion, railroads really began to take off during that time period, but they were highly unregulated. And so these different companies were able to manipulate their workers. They were able to utilize unfair labor practices, and it was all about in the name of benefiting their bottom line. And so strikes were a very strategic tactic that were utilized by different labor organizations. Management had a hard time replacing highly skilled workers because it was, while some of the work was very unskilled, there were different things, especially within the railroad industry, where you needed those highly skilled workers. When it came to steam engines, people had to know how to operate those, and if something needed to be repaired, they had to know how to repair them. So those type of individuals were highly skilled individuals, and so if they went on strike, that really could throw a wrench, I guess you could say, into how the railroad companies would move and operate during that time period. Now, one of the most notable early on strikes was the Great Railroad Strike. This strike actually began in West Virginia, and it was concerning the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Company. And here's what's interesting. I know some of you probably have played the game of Monopoly. If you've ever played Monopoly, you would know that B and O Railroad is actually one of the game pieces that is on the game Monopoly. Now, going back to the actual strike itself, what happened that led to the strike was that the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Company announced a 10% pay cut for workers. Now, this was after they had already had a previous pay cut for workers' wages. So this strike began in West Virginia, but it spread to places like Baltimore and Pittsburgh, as well as Chicago. And eventually, by the time it was all said and done, over 100,000 workers were on strike nationwide. The strike actually turned violent at one point, which caused federal troops to have to be called in because of some of the rioting that took place, because of how unhappy these strikers were with how they were being treated. Now, as a result of the Great Railroad Strike, one of the things that happened was it actually sharpened the focus on the rights of workers' rights, and so as a result of that, you really begin to see labor organizations become more focused and have a more clear philosophy on what it is that they were trying to gain and achieve for those that they represented. Now, one of the first major labor unions was the Knights of Labor. Founded in 1869, it wanted a few reforms. And the word reform simply means change. And so they did not represent one particular industry. They actually represented major, different industries, all of them which were major industries, but they all were working for the same common goals. Two of the big things that they wanted was the reduction of the workday from 10 to 12 hours to an 8-hour workday. Nowadays, typically you have an 8-hour workday. Anything over is required, for overtime, or anything under is considered part-time. But anyone who works 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, is considered a full-time employee present day. And so that's what they were after during the time period when the Knights of Labor were first created. The other thing that they worked for was for social reform. Social reform refers to things being changed socially among the people. Social means people. And so what they wanted was, they wanted to see things be changed for people in terms of their living conditions, in terms of how they were treated by landlords, treated by the government, and even treated by one another, because the other thing that they worked for was equality. Now, what's interesting about the Knights of Labor is that they offered membership to women and African Americans. They were one of the first labor unions to actually do this. Now, in 1879, Terence Powderly took over the Knights of Labor. He himself, however, was not a fan of strikes, and so he really attempted to try and keep the Knights of Labor from going on strike. He wanted to use that as essentially as a last resort, if even it was a resort at all, because he knew the impact that strikes would have not only on his people, but also on the economy and those around them. Now, from 1879 to 1885, the membership for the Knights of Labor grew from 9,000 members to over 100,000 members by the time 1885 had rolled around. Now, continuing on, we have to take a look at the Hay Market Riot. Now, the Hay Market Riot was one of the biggest riots and strike riots that took place in America's history. Union members were on strike against McCormick Works. McCormick Works was a harvesting machine factory. They're the ones, kind of like John Deere, Milwaukee. They're the ones who kind of make the equipment, the agricultural heavy machinery that would go out and like harvest crops and things of that nature. Well, you had the members go on strike. Union members went on strike, and as a result of that, they were picketing. They were outside of the factory, and they were picketing. But then you had scabs. Now, if you remember from your vocabulary terms, a scab is someone who is a non-union member who works during a strike. And so, of course, this frustrated all of the union members who were on strike. In this particular instance, it led to one person being killed and several others being injured. As a result of this, labor union leaders called for a public protest in Haymarket Square, which is in Chicago. Now, when this took place on the next day, so the original incident began on May 3rd, but on the next day, May 4th of 1886, this is when the actual Haymarket Riot took place. It is not sure who did it, but someone threw a bomb. And what happened was, when that bomb was thrown, the police responded with gunfire. As a result of that, several police officers and protesters were killed during this incident. Dozens more were injured as a result of this incident. Now, of course, the police began to look for someone who to make them responsible for this event. The police actually blamed the labor leaders for what transpired at the Haymarket Square riot. As a result of this, many believed that labor movements supported terrorism and anarchism. Now, if you remember, anarchism is another one of your vocabulary terms, and it simply means that someone who is against government, or the belief of government, or the way in which a government moves and operates. But they are extremists. That means they are to the far right or to the far left. They go above and beyond. They, as you guys would say, they do the most in their extremism. As a result, by the time the Haymarket Riot was over, 8 people had been arrested. Of the 8 that were arrested, 7 were sentenced to death, and 1 was sentenced to life in prison. The Knights of Labor were blamed for this event, even though they had no direct association with this event, and as a result, their membership declined significantly after the Haymarket Riot. Now, other major labor union that you had in place besides the Knights of Labor was the American Federation of Labor. The American Federation of Labor was formed in 1886 and was led by Samuel Gompers. Now, Mr. Gompers himself was a very harsh critic of the Knights of Labor. He believed that it was the role and the responsibility of the labor union to only focus on making economic gains for labor union workers. So he did not care too much about what was going on socially in his community, in complete contrast to the Knights of Labor. He wanted to have a major, he wanted to have a focused emphasis on better wages, benefits, and working conditions for those who were members of the American Federation of Labor. As a result of this, he sets out on a path to where the AFL actually becomes the leading labor organization, and it's the one where their membership takes off as a result of his efforts to make sure that what he puts at the forefront is the rights and the needs of the labor union workers in the different industries. So again, just kind of wrapping this up from today, from this lesson, you see the creation of two major labor unions that existed during this time period and are still around to this day, the American Federation of Labor and the Knights of Labor. And so both of them had strategic plans and ideas of what it is that they were out to achieve and how it is that they felt best they could achieve that. What you're going to do is you're going to take a closer look at how they went about utilizing specific strategies and tactics to improve the conditions of their labor union members.